Afghanistan has been suffering from years of terrorism like us here in Sri Lanka. The Afghan government and the Taliban are now attempting to reach a negotiated settlement. However, that process has not been going too smoothly. Hello and welcome to On Fire here on Daily Mirror Online. I'm Easwaran Rutnam. Our guest today is the Afghan ambassador to Sri Lanka, Ashraf Haidari. Ambassador, welcome to the program. Ambassador, tell us, how has terrorism really affected Afghanistan?
Well, unfortunately, terrorism has affected Afghanistan and the Afghan people in many tangible and intangible ways. Tangibly speaking, on average, over 10,000 Afghan civilians have been killed or wounded by terrorist attacks over the past few years. And many Afghans also, as a result of this imposed terror campaign across Afghanistan, have been driven out of their homes, becoming internally displaced, while a lot of Afghans have sought refuge in the neighboring countries and elsewhere. And also, terrorist attacks have targeted service delivery infrastructure of Afghanistan, including schools, universities, health clinics and hospitals, and as well as electricity transmission lines. As you see, that as a direct impact on the day-to-day life of the Afghan people. And then intangibly speaking, the war on terrorism unfortunately sapped so much of our resource, which could be spent on a sustainable development and poverty reduction, and as well as addressing other socioeconomic needs of our people. And also, of course, the war on terrorism and insecurity in Afghanistan unfortunately prevented the degree of investment that we'd like to attract from the region and outside. So it has affected Afghanistan in multiple ways, as I described.
Even today, we hear of incidents where the Taliban is very much active in Afghanistan. We hear of incidents where civilians are being targeted as well. How safe is your country?
Well, we are very proud of the Afghan security and defense forces who've been carrying out more than 90% of all military operations against the Taliban and other terrorist networks across Afghanistan. And this has happened since 2014, when most of the NATO and US forces withdrew from Afghanistan. So we've taken on this responsibility to protect our civilian populations and population centers from terrorist attacks by the Taliban. And of course, there are areas which are not safe, where battles continue between our forces and the Taliban, where we have often defeated the Taliban and cleared those areas of the Taliban presence. But there are also many other areas which are safe and secure, and those are in the north and northeast and central parts of Afghanistan, where people even go on trips on the weekends for picnicking, especially the province of Bamyan, which houses the statues of Buddha.
But you mentioned of the withdrawal of the NATO troops, but US troops remaining in Afghanistan has been an issue that has been highlighted in the global media. How do you see the US presence in Afghanistan and the role that they play?
Well, we're grateful to the American people and government for continuing to help stabilize Afghanistan, and also as well as with the reconstruction and sustainable development of our country. Their troops are in Afghanistan at the invitation of the Afghan government and people. We have signed the bilateral security agreement as well as the strategic partnership agreement with the United States based on our shared interests, which include this war against terrorism and extremism, which unfortunately happens in Afghanistan, foremost victimizing the Afghan people and destabilizing our country, but it has implications for regional security and stability, as well as international peace and security. And so that's why it's not only the US which is in Afghanistan, enabling our forces and fighting alongside us against terrorism and extremism, but also there are 40 plus other nations within the NATO alliance, and as well as support from the region, including our foundational strategic partner, India, because this is not only, like I said, a security threat to the Afghan people and government, but to the region and the rest of the world. So in a way, the Afghan forces are fighting this regional and transnational security threat. And that's why we expect our neighbors and partners in the region, and as well as the broader international community, to continue helping the Afghan security forces on the one hand, but also the Afghan government with our continued efforts to help develop the country to make the lives of our citizens better.
And we hear of attempts to reach a negotiated settlement. There have been plans to hold talks in Doha as well. We in Sri Lanka have been also having a serious issue with terrorism, and our experience has been, talks have not really seen progress with when we try to negotiate with terrorists. How do you see attempts by the Afghan government to reach a negotiated settlement with the Taliban?
Yes, achieving lasting peace that is dignified and sustainable is the desire and demand of every Afghan, because unfortunately our nation has been through now 40 plus decades of mostly imposed conflicts. So our government has been doing everything that we can to achieve peace, including, of course, reaching a negotiated political settlement with the Taliban as we continue defending Afghanistan against terrorist threats emanating from outside of our country. Just a few weeks before, our negotiating team went to Doha. Afghanistan held this peace consultative Voyager, where more than 3,000 representatives of the Afghan people came from across the country, which included women and men, and as well as youth, to discuss the peace process and to discuss their demands from the Taliban, so that we end war and violence in Afghanistan and reach a sustainable political settlement with them. And they also discussed one of the key demands of the Taliban, a concession that we made, although we were not a part of the deal that was signed between the Taliban and the US last February, and that was to release over 5,000 prisoners of the Taliban, most of whom who had committed war crimes in the country. And so for the sake of achieving peace, for the sake of ending this war and violence that has destroyed our country and daily kills innocent people, the consultative peace jirga, the Afghan people decided that the Afghan government should release the prisoners, which we did. And of course, at the same time, they called on the Taliban that in return for this major concession, the Taliban dramatically reduce violence, start peace talks with the Afghan negotiating team in Doha, and immediately commit to a humanitarian ceasefire so that we can together address the global COVID pandemic, which daily kills and infects hundreds of Afghans, much like the rest of South Asia, and then move towards a permanent ceasefire while focusing on the key issues of concerns on both sides for a permanent resolution. But like you said, we know from Sri Lanka's experience that mediated peace processes hardly helped Sri Lanka. Every context is different. We hope that that wouldn't happen in our case. That's why our government is firmly committed. The Afghan people are firmly committed. The Taliban understand that the Islamic Republic is very much based on a constitution that is foremost on the core principles and tenets of Islam. And so there is no reason for the Taliban to justify their violence, their war against their own innocent civilian people based on Islamic demands, which is already enshrined and addressed in the Afghan constitution. So that's why we've opened our arms, and we have invited the Taliban to come and negotiate a settlement that would enable them to democratically rejoin their society, laying down their weapons and integrating with their society and moving on together to help rebuild and develop our country.
And what sort of role can Sri Lanka play to help Afghanistan? Are there lessons that the Afghan government can learn from Sri Lanka?
Like I said, relevant lessons, we need to be cautious that on the one hand, we pursue peace through talks, which do not necessarily lead to the results that we seek, much like Sri Lankans did. On the other hand, continue fighting the terrorist groups, including the Taliban, that destabilize Afghanistan, and continue enlisting the support of our strategic partners, including the United States and the rest of NATO, and as well as our neighbors, including countries like Sri Lanka, which has both a war-fighting experience against terrorism for close to 3 decades, experience with the peace process, and as well as also if the peace process, as we expect to succeed, then we could also learn from Sri Lanka's post-conflict peace building, including reintegration of former combatants and developing areas where so much fighting happened and so much distraction unfortunately took place, so that our country comes together and develops on a sustainable basis.
Let's talk about trade between both countries. You've been very active in recent times, having a lot of meetings with the current Sri Lankan administration. What can Sri Lanka offer Afghanistan, or what can Afghanistan offer Sri Lanka by way of trade?
Well, I'm very happy that we recently signed the cooperation MOU between the Afghanistan Chamber of Commerce and Investment and the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, which had been one of my key goals since I came, so that through these two chambers we could bring our business communities together to discuss business and investment opportunities on both sides. Of course, we could easily benefit from tourism and medical tourism, and as well as higher education tourism here in Sri Lanka. There's high demand among Afghans for opportunities to seek higher education, medical treatment, and also take tourist trips to Sri Lanka. And also, Afghans are very interested in exporting our principal products such as fresh fruits, non-tropical fruits, so with high demand here in Sri Lanka, such as apples, pears, peaches, grapes, a variety of grapes and mulberries, and dried nuts such as almonds, walnuts, and pistachios, again with high demand here in Sri Lanka, and as well as carpets and rugs and gemstones, so where Sri Lanka has good capacity in terms of extracting and mining and then processing the precious and semi-precious, as well as designing and marketing to both customers here in Sri Lanka as well as exporting. So we look forward to taking advantage of those capacities of Sri Lanka in a win-win way. And from Sri Lanka, of course, we're interested in importing Sri Lanka's world-known quality Ceylon tea in a variety of tastes and colors, as well as coconut oil and other products from Sri Lanka, including in the services sector, your skilled labor was very much needed in Afghanistan. And over the past 20 years, Afghanistan has utilized skilled labor from Sri Lanka. There are so many Sri Lankans working across the different international organizations, including NGOs, United Nations agencies, and what time your security firms were operating in Afghanistan, and semi-skilled labor was mostly staffing most of US NATO bases across Afghanistan. And so there's that demand. And also we'd like to meet Sri Lanka's demand for unskilled labor, especially as your construction industry booms and your economy takes off. We can use your skilled labor, and you can use our unskilled labor. And here we have signed an MOU with Sri Lanka on the export of skilled labor from Sri Lanka to Afghanistan. And so there are many such give and take ways where once our business communities connect, and hopefully that's going to happen soon. As we just less than 2 weeks ago, we agreed that we should begin with webinars, bringing our businesses from different industries, some of which I pointed out, to talk face to face, so that we pave the way for exchanging trade delegations, and then do B2B meetings, and then also hold business matchmaking conferences, so that we bring our businesses with different capacities and opportunities and capital to come together and initiate joint ventures, is I think one of the best ways in order to address the security concerns of your business community, because we have many successful businesses with partners from the region and outside who would be willing to enter joint ventures with Sri Lankan businesses to export and import the products which I pointed out.
And you've also been discussing the possibility of establishing direct air links between Sri Lanka and Afghanistan. Where does that stand right
Absolutely. Now? I think that was almost going to happen, and I'm very grateful to His Excellency President Gotabaya Rajapaksa for understanding the importance of enhancing and bolstering bilateral trade and investment between our two countries. So when I met him following his electoral victory in December, we discussed this, because in order for our two nations and especially businesses to have the exchanges that I pointed out, we need to establish connectivity, both air connectivity, preferably a direct flight between Kabul and Colombo on a weekly basis to begin with, so that Sri Lanka can easily capture markets in the region, meeting the tourism, medical tourism, and higher education tourism needs of Afghanistan, but also transport cargo on both sides. But we should also explore trade through sea, and that can be also done via the Karachi port of Pakistan and the Charbagh port of Iran, through which we can easily import and export bulk freights. And so we're exploring all options. Unfortunately, this COVID pandemic got in the way, but that hasn't stopped us. We recently signed this MOU, and we continue getting in touch, talking, informing, and making our embassy available 24/7 to provide information for Sri Lankan business community and as well as ours, so that we make these contacts and connections happen.
Right, Ambassador, that's all the time we have on this show. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.